which is to say many, many more thousands of Americans are going to die in this pandemic than would have had to if it were not for American Fantasyland.
My name is Leighann Lord, and I'm the new co-host for Point of Inquiry. I am an author and veteran stand-up comedian who you may have seen on HBO and Comedy Central, and you might know my voice from Star Talk Radio with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. I had the opportunity to meet quite a few of you in the listening audience last year when I emceed CSICon. I'm hoping to do for the podcast what I did at the conference, and that's to bring a sense of humor and levity to the amazing conversations we'll be having. My guest this episode is Kurt Andersen. I had the pleasure of meeting him last year, 2019, at CSICon and introducing him as the conference's opening speaker. He is a TV and theater writer, a former editor of New York Magazine, and the co-creator of Spy. He's the former host of Public Radio International's Studio 360, and he's the author of many books, including True Believers, Heyday, and my personal favorite, Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire, a 500-year history. He takes the American fascination with fantasy all the way back to Jamestown and then breaks it down through the centuries and decades. He shares his inspiration for the book and how he started from the premise, America has gotten weird. Why is that? We agreed that there was a time when grown-ups were in charge, and now we've gotten out of balance, the current president perhaps being emblematic of that. Kurt was very clear, however, that the president did not create Fantasyland, but he's certainly the poster boy for it. And refreshingly, Kurt, being a glass-half-full kind of person, is hopeful that this crisis may serve as a rallying cry for the reality-based community, because in a crisis, for better or worse, we become more intense versions of ourselves. The despicable become more so, and the heroes among us emerge. Please enjoy my conversation with Kurt Andersen. This is Leighann Lord, the new co-host for Point of Inquiry. My guest today is Kurt Andersen. I had the pleasure of meeting him last year at CSICon and introducing him as the conference's opening speaker. He is a TV and theater writer, a former editor of New York Magazine, and the co-creator of Spy. He's the former host of Public Radio International's Studio 360, and he's the author of many books, including True Believers, Heyday, and my personal favorite, Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire, a 500-year history. He takes the American fascination with fantasy all the way back to Jamestown and then breaks it down through the centuries and decades. And it leaves me wondering if the COVID-19 pandemic and the country's response to it, or lack thereof, is just the latest chapter. Kurt, welcome to Point of Inquiry.
Hi, Leighann. It's completely my pleasure to be with you again.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Just to give our listeners a little bit of context, can you tell us what inspired you to write Fantasyland?
Yeah, it was a long time simmering or fermenting, or choose your verb. In the early 2000s, I suddenly realized that the kind of openness to craziness and preposterousness and falsehoods of all kinds had really gotten to a point where it was very different than when I was a kid, in the 60s and 70s. And I wondered how that was and what that was. I mean, partly I was motivated by the rise of the anti-evolution movement in fundamentalist Christianity, but other things as well, and New Aginess and all kinds of violations of what one of my heroes, former New York Senator Daniel Moynihan, used to say, which was, everyone is entitled to his own opinions, but he's not entitled to his own facts. And I really just felt as though it had reached a point of worsening that I wanted to figure out why that was and what was going on. And I was writing a novel about much of which was set in the 1960s. And I thought, well, this may have had something to do with it. What all that, that believing whatever you wanted about anything became so kind of privileged and allowed in the late 60s and early 70s. I thought, oh, maybe it was there. Maybe that was part of it. And I began doing more reading and more research and realized, yes, I think that was a big part of it, as I started, following the threads back in time, I realized, no, this is, they kept going further. And I realized that various parts of this, what I call Fantasyland, really have their roots in, as you said in the introduction, in our beginnings, in our prehistory, really, before the Europeans left, Europe to come here. So that's really how I started. It was just like, wow, America has gotten weird. Why is that? Which essentially was the beginning. And so I spent, a couple of years, giving myself a kind of self-run master's program in American history and American religious history and cultural history and all kinds of things to try to figure it out.
Again, full disclosure, I am a total fangirl, and I was just enraptured with what you did and how you broke it down. And it would have been very easy to stop at the 60s, because we think history begins when we get here. So I really admired how you went, no. Let's take a step back to our pre-beginnings, as you say. And I guess that leads to the big question of the moment. Did our Fantasyland thinking sort of land us here in our current pandemic predicament?
It certainly helped. It is certainly the predicament we are in. There is the virus and the illness exists, and that's a hard fact. But of course, our Fantasyland moment, and Donald Trump, of course, is the Lord of Fantasyland. I finished Fantasyland, actually, the draft of it before he was even nominated for president, and then he appears as president, as the nominee, and then as the president, as I'm revising it, as it's being edited, as the sort of poster boy, ultimate poster boy for all that I'm talking about: conspiracy theories, crazy religion, making up your own facts, all that. He comes along. So to the degree he's the president and he has this following of religious people and otherwise who are the denizens of Fantasyland. Yes, so he thought, for his own reasons and for a variety of reasons, many political reasons, no, I'm just going to pretend this doesn't exist. It's not happening. Let's ignore it. It's going to be great. Only a guy who was sort of spawned by Fantasyland, and many of whose most fervent followers and constituents are Fantasylanders. Naturally, of course, he lost us 2 months of preparing. He lost the United States federal government and American people 2 months of proper preparation. I mean, look, just compare us, for instance, to South Korea. At a certain point 2 months ago, the illness, the disease, the virus existed at the same level in both countries. They behaved properly and correctly because they're not fantasists, at least the people running the government. And we didn't. And so, throughout the book, as you know, Leighann, I talk about this thing that Thomas Jefferson said in his best book, actually, that he wrote in the 1780s about religion in America. And he said, I don't care if my neighbor believes in no God or 20 gods, as long as it doesn't pick my pocket or break my leg. Well, here's an example where lack of belief in empirical reality, if it is inconvenient or unpleasant to you, has led to lots of legs being broken and pockets being picked, which is to say, many, many more thousands of Americans are going to die in this pandemic than would have had to if it were not for American Fantasyland.
Agreed. And I guess coming off of that is, and maybe I'm being hopeful here, but is this pandemic, as serious as it is, something that can actually wake up enough people from Fantasyland thinking?
Well, that is the $64 gazillion question.
Yes,
I'm hopeful, but I've been hopeful before. I was hopeful that the financial crisis and crash and meltdown and recession of 2008, 2009 was going to be a wake up call. I wrote a little book about that with that hope. Now, that's different, and this, in its ultimate social, cultural impact, will dwarf, I think, the financial crisis and what happened then. So I'm hopeful that it will. That what I think it can do more than making people wake up from Fantasyland, because I think that's a harder problem to cure than the kind of adjacent connected problems of bad governance and electing bad presidents and bad members of Congress who believe in all kinds of craziness. I think it can have that effect in terms of making some new majority of Americans say, by golly, empirical reality, we should stick to that, and we should stick to science, and that whole anti-science thing I was into, no more. I have my doubts that it will have that effect. I think what it can do, however, is mobilize and galvanize those of us who do believe in science and something like objective, if not objective, then empirical reality, and take control of the culture and the political world again, as we of left and right, but the reality-based community used to be in charge. And so I think it can have that effect but that requires politics. I think the turning the world upside down, I can imagine that good will come from that. Yes, I do. I don't think that the lunatics will suddenly be rendered sane, however.
Well put. And I'm glad to hear that you have some hope. I know I too, I scroll Twitter, which is not the healthiest thing to do. But Twitter has its moments. When, Dr. Fauci was missing from the press briefings, the White House press briefings for a couple of days, it felt like sane America went mad. Like, where's our Dr. Fauci? Yeah. Where's Fauci was trending on Twitter, which although Twitter is a much smaller, medium than, say, Facebook, although it was happening on Facebook as well, it said to me that there were people who were thirsting for real knowledge and real information, and not the circus that we've been treated to.
I've never been a big Andrew Cuomo fan, being a New Yorker, but, I voted for him. He's okay. He has all his obvious problems. But among the other ways he's being a great and inspiring leader through this in his daily briefings is how fact-based they are. He gives you the numbers.
Yes.
He shows you the charts. He explains complicated epidemiological facts. And my God, what a pleasure that is, as opposed to the president and his little sycophant, the vice president, in their briefing. So yeah, there is hope. But yeah, in terms of reality and denial of reality, we've seen the president go from no, it's not going. It's going to be done by April 1st. We're good. It's not going to be a thing. The market's we're going to all be out, celebrating together on Easter, all that stuff. Well, the fact that he, at least for the moment, changed that big lie to another big lie, which is that he, he's never downplayed the seriousness of this. He's always been, from the beginning, he understood what a terrible crisis it was. Well, I would rather have him be telling that big lie and pushing that fantasy than the fantasy that this pandemic is nothing to worry about. So that's where we are. It's the choice of which giant fantasy and lie do we prefer? Well, I guess the one that accords more with at least the present day reality that can save lives.
That's where we are now. We're choosing our fantasies.
With this guy, that's exactly where we are. Yeah.
I guess, and you've talked about this in your book, how amazing it is that you can have people watching perhaps the exact same coverage or the exact same speech and still walking away in their own little bubble. Like what they've said, what's been said is just vindicates their opinion and they are unmoved. And it's almost like these two camps, and I'm simplifying, of course, these two camps, will use the same information to bludgeon each other.
Yeah.
Why do we keep doing this?
Partly it's because, I mean, a lot of reasons. That's part of, as you know, what I wrote this book to try to figure out. I mean, in the early 2000s, 2002, back when the sane and rational Republicans were running the country, Karl Rove, George W. Bush's mastermind, made his famous statement, anonymous at the time, but it was he, about how he was making fun of the reporter for being a member of the reality-based community. He coined that phrase and saying, we control reality now. We control how people understand the facts or not. In their evil genius way, they used that very thing that, again, had its roots in American history and had its roots in, of all places, the 1960s and the counterculture when, do your own thing, find your own truth became a kind of countercultural idea and then became an American idea even more than it had always been. And so that's why we are where we are. And you throw the internet into that, and cable television and all of the new technologies of information and misinformation delivery into the mix. I mean, we always believe what we believe and have our own opinion, but it was never so reinforced by both this kind of subjective, I can believe my own truth and I don't need experts and I don't need science, and it's just whatever I feel is true, combined with the ability via cable television and the internet to have your own bubble reinforced as it has never been able to be reinforced before. That's what got us here. And again, it's not inevitable. I mean, the United States is different. I mean, in the rest of the world, they have the same technologies, yet they do not suffer from the same kind of mass polarized versions of reality to the extent we do here.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because in the very beginning of your book, you talked about people that came to this country with their delusions, despite the facts on the ground. People are dying. There is no gold. You don't get here off the boat and you're famous, or not famous. You're wealthy within a week. But it's part of that fantasy. The upside of that fantasy is that American ingenuity. It built a nation, by hook or by crook. And so now are we on the bad edge of that now? The same thing that built us is the same thing that will take us down?
Yeah. The short answer is yes.
Short answer.
And because, the sad thing is, that dream the impossible dream, build it. I have this idea, or I can be whoever I want. I'm not forced to be a member of the class I was born in. All that stuff is great, and indeed is what made America great. But when it's like in all things, it's a matter of control. It's like, the carburetor in your car. Make sure there's not too much gas, and it stays in the balance. And we got out of balance these last 50 years. And that believe whatever I want, imagine whatever I want. All those things that in their proper degree are great, and what made this country amazing in so many ways has gotten out of control and exploited by certain political economic interests to keep it out of control, and that's a big problem as well, because it didn't what I write about in Fantasyland was more or less spontaneous. A bunch of nutty, high-spirited people came together, formed this country, but always kept the grown-ups more or less in charge and believed the experts and the learned people and the people who really knew about things, let them run the show more or less. And once our kind of anti-establishment impulse, which was again always a big part of the American impulse, got out of control and pushed the designated drivers out of the driver's seat, then that's what got us to the place we are now. So yes, but back to your succinct way of putting it, the very thing that is part of our great exceptional strength is exceptional in a different way and is leading us to the terrible set of places we're in now.
I often say many times to my friends and anyone who will listen that, I watch the news, I watch what's going on in the world. And the question that keeps popping up in my mind is, where are the grownups? I feel like when I was a kid, there were grownups. Yeah. There were people, things would get a little crazy. Somebody with a suit and a tie and a briefcase, would walk in and go, okay, enough of that. Right. And not everybody would get everything they wanted, but something reasonable would come from it. And I feel like I'm just watching not reason go out the window, reason not even be in the room.
Well said. The immoderation of what's real, what's true. Well, it's good in a way. It's good to interrogate and examine all the givens and all the conventional wisdoms and all that. But like anything, it can go overboard, and I believe it has in so many different ways. And again, I mean, one of the, as you know from the book, one of the ways I talk about in Fantasyland, in the history of Fantasyland, is not just what the experts say and to hell with you, professor or Mr. Establishment. It's also our love of entertainment, our excessive love of entertainment, and including the unreality that it creates. And so, again, in the way that Donald Trump came along embodying so much of what I was writing, history from the 18th and 19th century about, he's an entertainer and he's a showman, and entertainers aren't about what's true or real. It's about what's entertaining. And again, he didn't get us here, but he is symptomatic of it and exploiting every bit of it, including that American knack for and weakness for the entertainingly untrue.
And I'm going to try not to take that personally as an entertainer.
Well, we're myself. We're all entertainers, aren't we?
Yeah. So y'all, we have our 15 minutes, on Twitter and Instagram and any other platform where we can get people to hear us. Although I do think stand-up comedians at times carry a different legacy, and a different responsibility.
We are telling legacy, absolutely.
Yes, and I feel that particularly as someone who comes from the George Carlin School of comedy, his ability to make fun of these terrible conditions and make people laugh.
Totally.
I found that fascinating, and we still have that. Didn't evaporate with George Carlin, but that's just who I sort of trace it back to. I have a question. I wonder what you think of this when you talk about our Americans' excessive love of entertainment. We are in the part of the world where everybody stay home.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to go out. And so what people are doing, some people are enriching themselves and learning a new skill or cleaning their homes, being very idealistic here. But some people are binging. They are turning to entertainment. Are we self-medicating when we do that, or are we denying?
I mean, both. I mean, we all, or at least I have had these moments, fewer this week than last, but these moments where I watch. I get so involved in an episode of a show or a movie or cooking or reading a novel that I forget. Well, that the nightmare we're in with this pandemic, and then I suddenly get back to reality and realize, I'm back in this nightmarish reality. It's not denial, but it's respite. I am, despite my doomsaying, I am a kind of glass half full optimist, 51% optimistic, and I feel like, wow, this peak TV, 400 shows being created, more scripted television than ever. I feel like, it's all been leading up to this. These 3 months, nothing to do but watch television. It's good. Thank you, powers of the television show business universe, for creating this backlog of stuff I haven't seen, and it could be a great golden age of consuming more at this glutted time. It just seemed like, there's, a month ago, 2 months ago, ask any of us, I think we would have all said, there's too much to watch. There's so much good stuff I want to watch. Well, now's your time.
I like the way you phrase that it's not necessarily denial, but it's respite, because I do think we have to give our brains a break. I can't watch the news all day long. I've done that, and it no good ever comes of it. I also like to think of it as a turning toward the arts.
Yes.
That's what people turn to, whether, it's drama or comedy or music or art, that human beings, whether they think of it consciously or not, they know that this is something that helps me. This is something that helps us. Look at what we can do when we're working together and we're at our best. That's what I think art is in its various forms.
I totally agree. And that's a secondary bit of hopefulness I have, that we are free to, yes, consume the best that is there, whether it's on Netflix or in books.
Yes.
It's not all bad that, more than 99% of us are going to live, and 100% of us have these weeks and months in which to do whatever, become closer to our kids or our mothers or our lovers or husbands and wives, and read and consume and watch. So, again, I don't want, it's a grisly time that's about to get grislier. So many of us working more than one job and work.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh my God, I got to meet that schedule. Well, there's some upside here of for all of the, financial distress and other kinds of distress and health anxiety and all the rest. My late mother always used to say, well, something bad happens, something good can come out of that. She's right in her way. Yes, you don't have to be a constant consumer of information and empirical reality all the time. I think it's also an opportunity to, yes, as you're suggesting, sort of drink from the cups of art and great entertainment of various kinds.
You echoed something that Governor Cuomo, who's the governor of New York State, as fact-based as his briefings are, they're also oddly honest and compassionate when he's saying, are you bored? I'm bored. Are you scared? I'm scared. It's just so blunt and open. And the echoing part is that, yeah, I'm spending more time with my daughter than I normally would now. You're getting to be with your family, and he'll go, as annoying as that can be. So he's acknowledging the opportunity and the anxiety of it, which I guess is what makes his briefings, must-see TV. I feel like in some ways, because of the everyday American's response to this, that maybe we've watched one too many disaster movies. When people dashed out to the store to buy tons of groceries, and in particular toilet paper. Like no toothpaste, but toilet paper. They're hoarding. Like, what was that?
It was a curious one. I mean, I get the. I've never done the hoarding thing when hurricanes are going to come or whatever. I've never literally done it. I mean, after 9/11, my wife and I, bought some stuff for the next time, put a bunch of stuff in the basement. But this hoarding in advance of what? Of this thing in particular, because unless the whole society and all of its systems collapse, and I get the fear of that this time, I with medicines you need or whatever. But toilet paper, really? That's the thing you're going to miss most? I mean, there are other ways to take care of that problem, and as long as running water continues, I feel like after that initial few days of the running to Trader Joe's and stocking up on toilet paper passed, I feel as though people got over that. But no, I mean, again, panic is panic, and you never know how different people are going to react. Although the thing among the men, I always had said my first novel, I made one of the characters always said all cliches are true. She said that repeatedly, and it's a thing I believe as well. And the cliche that crises like this, people become more intense versions of whoever they are already. God, that is so true, and I've seen that in these last weeks to be such a true cliche, for better and for worse. The panicky people become panicky. The chill and wise people become chill and wise, and the practical people become more, all of it. And the capricious Fantasyland monsters, like the one in the White House, becomes more of that. And the heroes become heroes. It's really true.
I feel seen. And that's usually something that you only get to see in slow motion, because I believe the same thing, but as you get older.
Correct.
You become, as you get older, more of who you are.
Correct.
But I guess you're right. That also comes out in a crisis.
I'm sure you, like I, have read the various guides to writing screenplays. One of the things common to them all is that a movie is about putting your character in a moment of crisis or pressure, and she or he will that's the character test, and the character will be revealed, and that's how they change over the arc of your film. Well, here we are. I mean, and that's how you do it fictionally in 2 hours, or and here we're seeing it before our eyes, as we seldom do, because those of us who haven't fought in war, for instance, have never seen it, never seen that happen. And,
right.
And here we're all free,
Yeah, no, I'm a child of the 80s. All the wars I've been through have been financial. So I'm a little unprepared here, except for this and what I've seen on the History Channel. And you put that guide to writing screenplays. That was perfectly said. That's it's if you could have written it word for word. And speaking of writing word for word, if I've heard correctly, you have a new book coming out. I'm not sure when. It's Evil Geniuses: The Unmaking of America. Did I hear that correctly?
You heard that exactly correctly. And I am literally madly going over the edits with my editor now. My editor, who has been sick these last few weeks with something. Oh. He was tested negatively, but he recovered, and he's great. And and we're trying to put that to bed. And it's coming out in August, actually. And it's a history of these last 50 years. It's kind of a sequel or a companion volume, really, to Fantasyland, whereas, as you know, Fantasyland is about culture mostly, and religion and all of those things over several hundred years. This is really the last 50 years, and really about economics and politics, and how the hard ways in which things got rotten and unfair in the last 50 years in America, in this pandemic, the two sides meet. I mean, it's really Fantasyland meets Evil Geniuses. Let's deny reality, and let's make sure we all. One of the reasons we should deny it is because it can all get us back to work and get the stock market back up again, because that's all we really care about. So, because as I was writing Fantasyland, and as I went out talking about it for a year or more, 2 years really, people would say, "But okay, I get what you're saying, but how did this climate change denial thing happen, and why did that happen?" And I realized that the Fantasyland part of the story really is only half the story of how America got to be in dire straits. I mean, they're pretty dire straits. The Fantasyland part of the story, but the other part of the story, which connects, and in this response or lack of response to the pandemic, you can really see how it connects to this other story. So yeah, Evil Geniuses: The Unmaking of America, out in August. I hope it explains whatever Fantasyland doesn't explain.
Oh, it sounds like a wonderful companion book. You already have one sale. I'm very much looking forward to that. This is not a gotcha question, but I'm curious. Yeah. What does your corner of Fantasyland look like? Where do you kind of like go down the rabbit hole, perhaps unconsciously or by choice?
I stick fairly, close to the provable empirical truth. But none of us are. I hope none of us are absolutely devoid of weird hunches and odd beliefs. I mean, I still say knock wood when I say, when I don't want something to happen. I have my superstitions. I'm not without fantastical belief, and moreover, I find some of my least favorite friends are the ones who have no room for the mysterious or the even glimpses of the spiritual. I mean, we can get into a whole other discussion about what that means. But I know. I am pretty. I'm as rational as I think one wants to be. I mean, I still can look up at the sky and as I said to my wife the other night, as we were walking along this rural road where we're lucky enough to be spending the duration of this pandemic, like, looking up at the moon and the stars and the trees and hearing the frogs and all of it, saying, like, who needs religion? This is fucking unbelievable and amazing as it is. Why do you need anything more to produce awe or whatever else it is that religion people need? So I have my I wouldn't say I'm not spiritual but not religious, but I am not so I'm not such a explainer away of the miraculous and the amazing as some of my friends are. I like to be awed by the inexplicable, and there's plenty of inexplicable left in the world, and I think there will be for the rest of my life and humankind's life. So all of which is to say, I meditate. Okay, does that make me a resident of Fantasyland? I don't think so, because I don't believe I'm connecting with some higher power when I do that. I don't consider it prayer, but it isn't, it isn't consuming facts. I don't think that consuming facts and doing experiments are the only way to truth. Truth consists of more than facts, and I'm open to all kinds of emotion. I mean, emotion, God knows, is maybe all reducible to chemicals and algorithms, but I don't think, I think the people who, we can go too far in our skepticism, not in our skepticism, but in our kind of, in the narrowness of skepticism. We can be too narrow in our hyper rationality.
You make me think of Carl Sagan. Yes, it's good to be rational, but we also have to leave room for wonder.
100%. All of the great scientists and rationalists, the truly great ones, in my view, like Carl Sagan, yes, understand that wonder and awe are part of what makes us human, and however you get there is great, and the more you can get there without abandoning science and reason, the better, in my book.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you again for agreeing to be a guest on Point of Inquiry. I was very tickled to meet you at CSICon last year and read your book, and I'm so glad that there's a new one coming out, the companion, Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, which, if you and your editor continue furiously working, will be out August 2020. So, Kurt, thank you again for being a guest on Point of Inquiry.
Oh, thank you, Leighann. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Point of Inquiry is a production of the Center for Inquiry. CFI is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit organization whose vision is a world in which evidence, science, and compassion, rather than superstition, pseudoscience, or prejudice, guide public policy. Do you care about science and skepticism? Then please do share this episode to help spread the word about POI and the topics we discussed today. You can visit us at pointofinquiry.org. There you can listen to all of the past POI episodes dating back to 2005 and support the show and CFI's nonprofit advocacy work by clicking on the support button on the site. Please also remember to subscribe. We're available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and your favorite podcast app of choice. While there, please be sure to leave us a review, as every review we receive means a ton. Thanks for listening, and talk to you again in 2 weeks.